Welcome, everybody. My name is Effie McGlaris, and I am the Executive Director of the Fine Chocolate Industry Association. We have an exciting panel discussion for you today. But before we get started, I first of all would like to thank Ciro for their support for this webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and share a link to the work that Ciro is doing in Madagascar in the chat. But I also wanted to make a couple of upcoming trade show announcements. May 23rd through 26th, an in-person Sweets and Snacks Expo is taking place in Chicago. Then May 25th through 26th, virtually, the Cacao and Chocolate Summit is taking place, and Kate Cavallin and I will both be speaking. June 15th through the 14th in person is the Summer Fancy Food Show in New York. And June 23rd through the 25th, a hybrid Chocoa in Amsterdam. So I will share all of the links in the chat, and I am going to turn it over to Kate Cavallin, who chairs our value chain committee and has been instrumental in bringing this group together and keeping the conversation going regarding issues like transparency and traceability and developing a common language. So thank you.
Thanks, Effie. First of all, thanks so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming from. Thank you guys so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day. I want to give as much time to Kristy and the panel, but before I do, I just want to kind of walk everybody who hasn't been on prior conversations through what the Value Chain Committee, who has really been instrumental and motivating me to continue this process going forward, what exactly we've done. And from January 2021, we did a Survey Monkey and polled the Value Chain Committee on the priorities that they saw in terms of our segment and what was most important. And what answer came back as a resounding interest among all members was how we differentiate ourselves from the bulk market and how we discuss our segment of the market. And as a result, we started to hone in on traceability and transparency and built a working group of around 10 members. And we met almost every week for over 6 months to start to break out the definitions of traceability and transparency, as well as build what we now consider the chocolate ecosystem assessment and a glossary of terms. And those two things have evolved. And the chocolate ecosystem was launched in January. And after, I think over 60 members responded to the assessment, and we gave an initial presentation, an initial webinar a few months ago. And in the meantime, since that webinar, we've had a very lucky opportunity to work with Kristy Leissle, who's here. And thank you again to Ciro personally, to be able to analyze those results as well as to really hone in on this glossary of terms. And the ecosystem assessment is an important evaluation tool for companies as well as for the industry, as well as the glossary of terms, really to provide thought leadership as FCIA in communicating about basic terms and using the same language and the same ideas, but also in understanding how we can collaborate and grow together as an industry. It's something that we've recognized coffee and specialty coffee has really been able to do, to find a way to talk among members, and also for companies to be able to talk internally as well as with customers about what makes us different and why we support each other and our businesses. Before I pass it along to Kristy, I do just want to point out they identify fine chocolate as 5% of the overall market, if that. I think when we start breaking down artisan, craft, bean to bar, and fine, we can really start to get into our particular markets. One of the FCIA's goals and one of my goals as a member of the Value Chain Committee is growing that market and really getting people to understand what we're trying to do in all of our different segments and all of our different ways towards, I think, a better cocoa and chocolate future. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Kristy. Thank you all, and please reach out if you want to participate in the value chain committee. We're always welcome new members, and please let me know if anybody has questions. Thanks so much. Take it away.
Kate, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to work with you on this chocolate ecosystem analysis over the past few months. And I am just really, really happy to be here today sharing the findings of this analysis with all of you who are here at joining us for this webinar. So we did an extensive analysis of the ecosystem survey results and developed a few tools that we'll be sharing with you today. So you'll see the results of this analysis in a couple of different ways. The first one that I want to mention just briefly is a press release that will talk about the launch of the glossary of fine chocolate terms that we'll be spending most of our webinar discussing today, but also some key findings from the ecosystem survey. So in the survey results, there emerged some of the elements of fine chocolate as members identify them, what priorities FCIA members share, where members lead in this industry, and as Effie and Kate both mentioned before, how members differentiate fine chocolate from other segments of the industry. So all of that is summarized in the press release. It is, of course, brief because it's a press release, but you'll be seeing that quite soon. One of the big learnings that we got from the survey analysis, as Kate mentioned, is that the need for a shared language around fine chocolate. And for that, we developed the FCIA Glossary of Fine Chocolate Terms. So that's the major tool to come out of the survey analysis and will be the focus of the rest of the webinar. So before we go into the details of the glossary, I want to emphasize an important point, which is that the FCIA has really paid attention to and recognizes the importance of critiques regarding diversity and inclusivity in webinars, in membership, in knowledge sharing among the community of fine chocolate. And in developing this glossary, that inclusivity has really been a top priority. So I want to take this opportunity to emphasize that the glossary is going to be a living document. It's a dynamic tool that will be constantly evolving and changing, subject to revisions over time. And it is also an inclusive tool. The other point that I want to mention before we get into the details is that really in developing this glossary, we want to recognize the work that has come before that has done that has tackled this challenge of developing a shared language around fine chocolate. So there have been many initiatives, many experts working on this in different capacities, but the two I want to recognize really among these many others are Pam Williams at École Chocolat, whose own glossary of fine chocolate terms has been a work in progress, I think, for about 20 years. We'll hear more from Alicia about that soon, as well as the recent collaborative work by Gaia Cacao, USDA, and IESC. So you all will have received a copy of the Global Cocoa Market Study that was released in November, and will have seen that that report also did a great deal of work to establish a shared language and come to some common definitions of terms. So we're really building upon that now with this new thought leadership tool of the FCIA glossary. In contrast, a little bit to these previous works, we do envision the glossary, like I said, as a living document. It will be constantly revised, new additions will come, and there are many different opportunities over time for members and non-member experts to engage with the terms and to come to a deeper understanding of what those terms might mean for different people working in different capacities in the fine chocolate segment. There is a process in place. I can't emphasize that enough, that we have spent a lot of time developing a process for reviewing new definitions, for revising existing definitions. At the moment, the plan is to offer a revision process twice a year, once in the spring and once in the autumn, and details about that will follow. So before I go into a little bit more about the process of coming up with new terms and definitions, I'll show you the page. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. You can all access this page yourselves, but I will share it now and show you the placeholder page essentially for the fine chocolate glossary of terms. And so the other panelists who I can see, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen share now of the glossary? Great, thank you very much. So a few elements to point out. So we have, for this launch, defined 5 terms. They are clean label, farm gate price, living income differential, traceability, and transparency. So we wanted to launch this glossary with a few terms already up there. And we solicited these terms. Some of them had previously been defined by the Value Chain Committee. And we solicited other authors and experts to contribute for the purposes of this launch. So you can have a look. I'm going to talk you through the format of the definitions because that's important. But I want to point out to you two other elements of this page. One is that we also have authors who are confirmed, but who are still working on their definitions and who will be contributing very shortly. And they will be contributing definitions for the terms child labor, confectioner, heirloom cacao, intercropping, and also value chain. In our invitations to these initial launch authors, we have reached out across our own personal networks, and we've done our best to include voices of people who are working in really different ways in this industry, because this is one of the major goals of the glossary, is to bring these different types of expertise in. How I define intercropping or value chain may be very different to how someone else defines it. And so the point of the glossary is to give us all an opportunity to hear from our peers, to hear from other experts, and they will be coming from as diverse a professional background as we can possibly get. The other thing that's included on this page is the draft list of glossary entries. And I'd love for you to have a look through this, even now during this webinar, if you're able. We have compiled a list of about 150 terms that we believe are relevant and important to fine chocolate. And most of those are listed here. And I'll just scroll down slowly so that you can see. But again, this is the initial list. And so we fully expect and anticipate that this list will be added to significantly over time. And it's one of the questions that I'll be putting to our expert panelists today is, what terms did we not put on this list that you believe are important and you need for us to add so that we can all start coming to a shared meaning around these. So we've done our best, but again, we did not launch this glossary with the purposes of giving you knowledge. This is not about saying we've got it all figured out. This is about saying we've come up with a process by which to generate knowledge collaboratively and together around terminology of fine chocolate. So I'm going to stop my screen share there and walk you through a little bit what the format of what you just saw. So this is one of the things I spent a lot of time on in developing the architecture of the glossary. Well, first, let me back up for just 1 minute and say what you saw right there was a static page with the definitions copied and pasted in. The hope and the plan is to make this a searchable database that's internally linked, that's externally linked, and it will function like any kind of online encyclopedia, and like a Wikipedia would be a good example for you to imagine in your head, where a user will come to the website, they'll be able to type in a term in that they want to learn more about into a search bar, and the definition will come up. And that definition will suggest related terms that also appear in the glossary, and it will have an opportunity to link to other elements. So what you see right now is static, but it will become a dynamic searchable database, hopefully in the very near future. So the definition format is intentionally very precise. And this is where I probably spent the most of my time. Each definition has a few important elements. One is it must be written in a way that someone who is not a professional in this industry or an expert in that particular area should be able to understand it. So the glossary is going to be publicly accessible. That means that FCIA members will be able to access it, but also maybe a student who's doing a research project on cocoa or chocolate. I'm sure, like I get requests from students all the time to, asking me about terms or things in the industry. I'm sure many of you also receive these requests. This is a database where we can now point these kinds of students, these kinds of researchers, journalists who may be looking for answers to questions about fine chocolate. They'll all be able to access this glossary. So we really need for the definitions to be written in a language that's accessible to them. Another important element is that each definition is required, can't say that enough, to list at least one credible source and ideally more than one source. So we're following the protocols of academic writing in this way, where academic writers have to cite their sources, because when you cite other people's work who are also experts in your field, you're basically having a conversation. It doesn't happen face to face. It happens over time on the page. And it's a way for the definitions in this glossary to demonstrate their credibility, demonstrate that the author has done their research. They've learned what other people in the industry have to say about it. Maybe they're citing a source because that source demonstrates a gap in the knowledge that they're going to fill in their definition. But regardless, it gives it that element of a conversation among peers, among experts. And it is a really important feature of the glossary that this isn't, while every author is invited because of their professional expertise and experience, they also really need to demonstrate that they're having that kind of interaction with their peers in the fine chocolate world. The third element is that there are many terms on that list that you just saw that might not be specific to cocoa or chocolate. So I'll give you one example. The glossary will have an entry for fair trade. Now we know that fair trade covers many different commodities, many different products, not just cocoa and chocolate. If the term is not specific to cocoa or chocolate, like fair trade isn't, then the definition has to include an example that is specific to cocoa or chocolate to illustrate its relevance within our fine chocolate segment. And so lots of different process tools that have been built into the template for the definitions that we can use to demonstrate the credibility of these entries and to just invite in the shared generation of meaning. So every element is geared towards collaboration, it's geared towards knowledge sharing, it's geared towards inclusivity. So I will turn in just moments to our expert panel who are here to discuss this glossary, but just before I do, I want to just make mention of the fact that we really do envision this glossary, while it is a tool for FCIA members, it is an outward looking tool. And by that, I mean, it is there publicly accessible for anyone who's interested to engage with it. And I feel personally like that's a really important feature of this glossary because it gives us an opportunity to invite different companies, to invite different experts, to invite different professionals that we may know personally or we may want to reach out to invite them in to participate in developing this shared language around Five Chocolate. At the same time, because it is an FCIA tool, it really does demonstrate FCIA thought leadership, right? So this is a tool that the organization has developed and that the organization will maintain over time. It will invite non-members in to author terms, but it's a demonstration of the leadership that FCIA has in this industry around the fine chocolate segment and dialogue and knowledge creation and knowledge sharing. If you are a chocolate maker, if you are a chocolatier, any capacity that you work in this industry, what we really hope that you will see is that your work may be making product and selling product. You shouldn't have to take the responsibility. You shouldn't have to bear all the responsibility for creating a common language for yourself. You have enough work to do. This is a tool to help you do that. This is a tool to assist you. And really the only thing that it's going to take for you to use it effectively is to trust the process. And as I said before, we haven't launched it with all the terms complete. Far from it. We've launched in a way to demonstrate the scale of it, the intended scope of the glossary, and invite you into the process to make it shareable, verifiable, healthily debated in every possible way. So starting right now in this webinar, we're already crowdsourcing suggestions for authors and terms. After the webinar concludes, you'll receive the usual link to this video. And with that, you will receive the different resources and links that you need to participate in this project. And so there are 2 links to Google Forms. One of them is a submission form that will allow invited authors to submit their entry. The other is a feedback form that is open to anyone at any time. And with that form, you can propose a new term, you can propose a new author, you can propose a revision to an existing definition. And that tool is already available, it's already live, and you can start using it at any time. In today's webinar, you are absolutely free to use the Q&A function, the chat function in the webinar, and we will have a period of time for question and answer later. And I invite all of your comments, all of your queries, and all of your suggestions. So I will turn now to our expert panel. One of the things that we wanted to do when we launched this glossary was to invite the expertise of people working in various positions in fine chocolate to share with us what they see as the value of developing a common language, a shared set of meanings. I'm going to introduce our panel and then we'll get straight to our discussion. So we have joining us today Eduardo Somariba, who is professor in agroforestry at Kate, the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center in Costa Rica. Eduardo has a PhD in biology from the University of Michigan and is currently researching tree management and shade design for coffee and cacao farms. Very impressively, Eduardo has published more than 200 scientific articles, technical manuals, books, and educational materials, and these are geared not only to university students, but also to farmers. We have also joining us Albert Chow, co-founder of the award-winning Fifth Dimension Chocolates, an online chocolate company based in London that specializes in luxury handmade chocolates as well as caramel sauces. Albert completed the level 3 chocolate tasting course at the International Institute of Chocolate and Cacao Tasting in Peru, and is a regular judge at the Academy of Chocolate Awards and the Great Taste Awards. Alicia Krupp is a partner at École Chocolat Professional School of Chocolate Arts, which offers programs in professional chocolate making and business operations. Alicia holds a master's degree in management science from Queen's University. She is currently program and marketing director at École Chocolat and is co-chair of the FCIA Communications Committee. We have with us Monica Rogan, who is co-founder and chocolate maker at the award-winning Good Now Farms chocolate, which recently earned a spot on Food and Wine magazine's list of the best chocolate in America. Congratulations, Monica, and everyone at Good Now Farms. Monica holds a BS in Integrated Science and Technology from James Madison University and an MBA from Pepperdine. She's an active member of the FCIA Communications and Value Chain Committees. And we also have with us today, probably joining with audio only, is Kojo Hayford, who is publisher and editor of the Cocoa Post, a cocoa and chocolate industry news portal based in Accra, Ghana. Kojo is also founder of the Ghana Cocoa Awards, which is an initiative promoting excellence in the Ghanaian cocoa industry. Kojo is also currently the communications officer for the Cocoa Value Addition Artisans Association of Ghana, which is based in Accra, also known as COVAG. So thank you so much, all of you. It's such a pleasure to have you. I know you're very, very busy, and I'm so appreciative for all of the work that you have done leading up to this panel and for the discussion that we'll now have around the glossary and the importance of a shared language. So I'm going to start out with a question that we've been discussing in various ways, which is, we've all had experience when we use a term related to cocoa or chocolate, and what we mean by the term is different to what someone else may mean by it. Can you describe for us one of those experiences where you were using a term in a business setting, in a piece of writing, wherever, and you knew that there was a possibility that your audience would have a different meaning for that term? So Albert, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about this recently, so why don't we start with you?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Kristy, for that. So one of the things that we've seen is when we do shows, obviously we do filled chocolates and they're molded chocolates. And so a lot of times when customers come to us and they say, oh, look at this piece of truffle, or look at this piece of Belgian chocolate, when what they mean is just the filled chocolates. And so for us, it hasn't happened to us because we kind of know what they talk about. They use the term interchangeably. But occasionally you may get someone to say they particularly want truffle, and then we sort of say, well, you know, there's a molded chocolate. And nope, they're looking for a piece of chocolate truffle. Or the other way around, sometimes you would say, oh, I'm looking to buy some truffles. And then you may say, well, we don't do that. We do other things. We do maybe hand dipped chocolates or something. So people are using the term interchangeably. So that could potentially lead to loss in sales because you may not be offering exactly the product, even though they mean something a bit more generic than that. So there's that possibility. Another thing actually I come across as well in the chocolate tasting session, actually, some of the people in the audience, they would talk about what is your favorite chocolate bar. Now in the US, you would think chocolate bar as things that, you know, is a plain bar, while it's in something that's like an inclusion. You sometimes call it candy bar, especially inclusion with, or maybe with caramels and all that, or even like the more industrial chocolate. But when they start talking about that chocolate bar, is in the UK, and the UK setting, people immediately thought more like what in the US you would call a candy bar. So even like we speak the same language, we don't. That's a common issue that we found as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Albert, we were chatting about that a lot in these last few days, of how even the British English and the American English have different terms, and we were chatting about like chocolate slab and chocolate bark and even chocolate tablet and chocolate. There was another term that was mostly used in the UK, but we wouldn't necessarily use in America. That it wasn't tablet, it was something else. But the point is that even like you say, we're all speaking the same language, we're actually not speaking the same language. And for customers, that might be a point of confusion. Yeah.
And one example you just brought out, chocolate bark. In the US, you use it a lot. In the UK, I don't think we use it. So I'll give you an example. My sister, a few years ago, she used to say, can you just make some chocolate bark for us? And I sort of say, what is it? And there's like within the same family, my sister's educated in the UK, but she spent some time in the US, and she picked up these terms herself. And so that would be quite useful to have something where, you know, so when you think about the terms, you don't just think about what you use in the US, you have to think about the cultural differences potentially as well.
Albert, thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity because I know Kojo and I spoke just before this webinar started, and Kojo is actually in the offices of the Ghana Cocoa Board right now, potentially going into a meeting. So I want to seize the moment when we have him online. Kojo, are you able to hear me? It's possible that we don't have Kojo online, although I can see his little square. So I'll wait and see, because Kojo and I have also been talking about the term cocoa farmer itself and how that has different meanings. But while we wait to see if Kojo is able to join us, I invite our other panelists to talk about an experience you have where terms might have different meanings depending on the audience.
I'd love to share some of my experiences. We make fine chocolate at Goodnow Farms Chocolate, fine flavor chocolate. And when I speak with customers or people that maybe aren't familiar with our chocolate, I explain like, oh, we make chocolate. We're chocolate makers. We make peanut butter chocolate. And they say, oh, you're a chocolatier. And I say, well, not exactly. Chocolatier is chocolate maker could also be a chocolatier. A chocolatier is someone that already takes chocolate that's been crafted and then adds something to it, creates something beautiful, unique, and delicious, like a truffle or a bonbon, or even a chocolate bar with flavor inside of it. However, as a chocolate maker, I actually make the chocolate with the beans. And that's so important to share with the community and to educate people about it, because there's such a disconnect for people about what goes into their food and what is chocolate. The only thing you need to create chocolate, as defined by the FDA, is a sweetener and cacao, So, I mean, there's so much that we need to establish just to be able to have a common language and have a common conversation, because that's the biggest thing we want to do. We just want to be able to connect and share our world with our consumers and explain why it's important for all of us.
Listening to Albert and Monica, listening to you both, one of the things that strikes me is that how much we take for granted as, professionals in this industry. And I know that this is certainly something that I do all the time. I take for granted even a basic term like chocolate or chocolate maker, which is, something that I've been thinking about for, many years now, but that's not the case for so many people that we interact with. And so even the need to define what we might consider basic terms is so important. Any other examples that you'd like to share, Alicia?
That makes me think of something that I was going to bring up, actually, Kristy, which is the distinction. We see a lot of conversation about the distinction between using the terms cacao and cocoa. And some people have a very specific definition that cacao is, the tree and the seeds and the beans until fermentation. And then once they're actually shipped as cocoa beans, then they're cocoa, and that they are two completely different things. Other people say, no, cocoa is just the English word for cacao, and we don't need to have that distinction. So I think establishing, kind of settling that, and that we're all talking about the same thing when it's such a core piece of our industry, I think is really important.
And, it might be even a surprise for people who are not part of this industry every day to learn that that's a debate, that's a discussion that we have. It's like in my book is called Cocoa. And I felt in the introduction to that book that thank you, Effie. I felt that I had to address this exact issue. And in the introduction, I spent a little bit of time on it to say, this is a debate. Because if you picked up that book as a student, maybe you're a university student who wants to write a paper on cocoa, you might not have any idea that there's even a debate over that term. Whereas, we in the industry are very used to people meaning really different things by cocoa, by cacao, by chocolate, as we said.
Kristy, the one thing I wanted to add is cocoa and cacao can also be used depending on a geographic region. So maybe people in Latin America will use the word cacao, and then people in Ghana might use the word cocoa. So that's another thing that we also need to be aware of.
100%, Effie. Having worked in West Africa for most of my career, it's cocoa there all the time. You never hear people say cacao. If I'd done my work in Central or South America, I'd have had a totally different experience. Eduardo, are there any experiences that you've had with this issue around different meanings around specific terms?
Definitely, especially in the field that I work, which is the agroforestry world. People think of agroforestry that you have to have a lot of trees. And there is a big difference. When I ask them, if you have a hectare of cocoa and only one tree, is that agroforestry, or you need to have 100 trees? The presence of the trees always bring about the questions about shading. And most people use tree cover and shade as synonymous words. They are not definitely the same. One has to do with having crown here on top of the cacao, and the other one really has to do with the actual reduction in the light coming down to the cacao plantation. And this kind of precisions are really important when you are into the designing of improved systems. You really need to have a really common understanding of what the terms that are being used for the planning of the system. So I think it's a critical aspect to define, do we need a number of trees to be agroforestry, or does he have a tree cover, and what are the shade associated with this tree cover? Obviously, that will depend very much on the kind of species you have, whether they have a big leaves or small leaves. And there are so many details there that really confuse the two terms. We need some more precision about that in the conversation.
Thank you so much for that example, Eduardo, because what it just made me think of is that, I don't have an agroforestry background at all. So I would not have thought of that term, shade cover or canopy or anything. But where I do see it is on some chocolate bar packaging, right? And so these are terms where scientifically there's going to be a really specific meaning, but they're used in marketing. And so this glossary is a chance for us to say, here is actually what this term means. And, for consumers, this could be really important. They might just have a beautiful picture in their head of what shade means, right?
And sometimes you think of shade only on the trees. You can go to Ecuador, which is a very classical example. Really, shading in a cocoa plantation comes from three different sources. One comes obviously from the trees on top of the cocoa, but sometimes the shade is cast by cloudiness. And it's the case in El Salvador, in Ecuador, that you go to these areas where no shade, but it's actually, when you look at the Google, this week and next week and the following week, there's always this complete canopy cover, the cloud cover that is really shading the cacao. And sometimes when you grow the cacao at a high density, as it is done in Africa, there's a lot of self-shading taking place there. So you always have shade in the plantation, even if you don't have trees there. So there are some subtleties there that really people need to understand when talking about shade.
I mean, I've just learned so much listening to you. I had never, ever thought about shade just being from a cloud, I only ever had a picture in my head of it being from a leafy tree, so yeah, that's a whole new learning. I want to quickly just see if Kojo is there. Kojo, if you are listening in, or if you're able to unmute and join in, I'll just wait a second and see. And if not, I realize you may be in with Ghana Cocoa Board at this very moment. All right, I will keep an eye out for Kojo on the various channels that I have in front of me right now, and we're really hopeful that he's able to chime in at some point. I'll just quickly mention that one of the things that Kojo and I had talked about before this webinar was the term cocoa farmer. In Ghana, for example, cocoa farmer can mean so many different things. It can mean the landowner, who may never step foot on the farm or do any kind of labor, but is technically, even legally, the cocoa farmer because of the land ownership. Cocoa farmer can refer to the tenant or the sharecropper who's actually doing the everyday labor. It doesn't necessarily this understanding isn't necessarily present in Ghana, but outside the country, people who even do day laboring work on cocoa farms would be kind of lumped in with cocoa farmer, even though that term wouldn't necessarily apply to them within Ghana itself. So again, something that we all might consider very basic, cocoa farmer, someone who farms cocoa, actually has a lot of different meanings, and they're really dependent on many aspects, legal aspects, ownership aspects, geographical, even cultural. So again, hopeful that Kojo is going to be here with us and be able to contribute at some point, but we will just move on to a more general question for our panelists about just the importance of having a common language, a shared set of meanings around fine chocolate. So you've all given really, really wonderful specific examples. So now let's talk more generally. Why do you think it's important that we have this glossary? Why is it important that we share a language together and a set of meetings around fine chocolate?
So shall I start first? So I think, with the common language, you avoid any confusion and ambiguity and misunderstanding, because like we've shown a few examples already, sometimes it's just everyone's talk about the same thing, or they have different words, but actually talk about exactly the same thing. And it will also help to exchange information as well between different people, whether it's the same countries, different countries. Just think about, think about an example, not even related to chocolate. Just think about the banking system. How do we manage to use your bank card from one country to another? It's because in the banking industry, they have very standardized things. They have your 16-digit card number. The card look exactly the same, so it's not like even different sizes it goes in. And they have all the system talking to each other, so you can draw the money out from abroad. And also, I think it's quite important as well, not just for people speaking English, but people, especially for non-English speakers as well. If they see a term, an English term, they can just say, okay, that's what it means, and you have that translation back to their own language directly, rather than say they translate it and sometimes it means one thing, sometimes it means something else. And again, that's just avoid the confusion as well. And I think it's just, it helps to get that conversation going with the general public as well, because if they understand these terms, it will help us to communicate with them and them communicate with us as well. And hopefully that will bring a lot more close together as well for that purpose. So that's what I think.
I agree. I definitely agree with Albert. When he said that there's confusion, I agree. There's a lot of confusion, in chocolate. What is chocolate? What is fair trade good? Like, does it have to be organic? Like, these chocolate, there are all these terms, and the conversation is happening. It's happening with everyone. And if we don't come together as an industry to actually recognize that and say, this is what we stand for, and these are the terms, and this is what we agree to, we're not going to be included in that conversation. And I think that we are very powerful as, cacao growers, chocolate makers, chocolatiers, third party, there's so many stakeholders in FCIA and in fine chocolate that are valuable and that have so much passion and connection. And we have the ability to shape the conversation and to work together to be able to help people understand. And I think that is a tremendous opportunity to educate the public. And even if there is dissension about, what a couple terms could mean, I think it's really important to be inclusive and to have people's different perspectives represented and to have that discourse to come to common understanding so that we as an industry can grow our fine chocolate market.
Absolutely. And kind of piggybacking on what Monica is saying. So, I think at École Chocolat, we think about terminology, both from the perspective of, we are educating people that are entering the industry. And so we want them to be armed with, the correct definitions, the correct terminology, because they are then people that are going to be going out and interacting with customers and educating people. And we want them to be building transparency and trust with their customers. And then the other piece to what Monica was saying that I agree with also is just, as Lauren has mentioned, as Kate has mentioned, we are such a small segment of the whole chocolate market. And I think we really need to come together if we're going to have any hope of really growing our segment of the industry. And I think we've all seen people have, you know, debates on social media, debates in person, whatever it is about terminology. And I think the sooner that we can all get on the same page about terminology, then we can turn our attention to growing our industry, which is of course what we all want. So I think it's just really important for our growth together.
Yeah, I think my colleagues gave wonderful reason why it's so important in science, in industry, and also in marriage. You cannot imagine the fight that I have with my wife, you know, to make sure that we talk about the same thing when we say something, you know. We saw in agroforestry, it took probably 15 years in the early years of the science, you know, to really agree on the terminology and the concepts. And at the end, we did a lot of work to define everything we could, and realize that even if you try as hard as you try, there'll always be a narrow margin of uncertainty in any definition that you can come up with, you know. So we have to be aware that, okay, we're going to have a common language, but it's not going to be closed, and it will not solve 100% of all the problems. There'll always be a 9%, 5%, 10% gray area, but you really don't want to step in, you know, in science, in industry, and in marriage too.
And Eduardo, I love that example so much, because I know it's very different from the banking example that Albert brought up, but I feel like they are the same, because when I think about like using my bank card, I think like I don't need to have to explain to the person behind the cash register what this card is or how it's supposed to work, right? And same like in any relationship, we do need to have some kind of basis level of you know, understanding to proceed with the kind of transactions that we're trying to do, or the conversation. So I love both of those examples. Kojo, I see your square has lit up, so please feel free to jump into this conversation.
Hello, everyone. It's great to join you. I'm very happy to be here. I was having a bit of problems, but I'm okay now. So I'm happy to join in. So like Kristy, you mentioned earlier, the term cocoa farmer indeed is a problem here in Ghana. There's no clear definition for that word, at least one that we all agree to. So that's very right. Another word that I am able to mention readily is the term bonus or premium, an amount that is paid to the cocoa farmers. Yes, it's not so clear, I mean, what the premium is. In fact, it looks like it's different for every cocoa buying company down here in Ghana, what premium represents and what bonus represents, you know, to the farmer, what it means to the, companies, what it means and all that. So there's also that confusion there that needs to be cleared. And then coming to the point, the question on the floor right now has to be the relevance of the glossary. From my standpoint as a journalist, I think it is, so important. I entered into cocoa reporting or not having a real background in the sector. So one of the problems I faced was the meanings and definitions of words as I try to report, communicate what I think something means to the audience. Sometimes I think, am I saying the right thing? Am I carrying the right message to the people? Do I myself have the clearer understanding of what I'm trying to say? So I think I saw the need for something like a glossary. So I even went to Cocoa Board to find out if they have any documents, that I can refer to start to train myself as I found myself in this sector. But unfortunately, there is nothing like that. So what you are doing, it's, a great project. Is going to benefit for myself as a journalist, yes. And I'm looking at Cocoa Post we having a lot of journalists joining, and we growing. As people come on board, they have to, know the terminologies that apply in the sector. And so such a document would be so great to train, bringing everybody up to par as we try to communicate in this industry.
Kojo, first of all, it's so great to hear your voice. It's been a few months since I've seen you in person, so it's really fantastic to hear you. And I want to just say that, when you made the point that when you started Cocoa Post, which now is like the premier news channel for cocoa in Ghana, which is big, right? Because Ghana is the second largest cocoa producing country in the world. There is so much information, there is so much news, but you, like all of us, started somewhere. We didn't all start knowing the meaning of these terms, right? And so I'm so grateful to you for just that reminder that no matter where we are now in this industry, we all had to make a beginning. And the glossary is a tool that will help people in their more kind of advanced stages of research, but also at the beginning, which is this crucial time for people to enter in to an understanding that's foundational, that's helpful, and lets them proceed with their work in a more productive way. And I also I just really need to say thank you, Kojo, for bringing up the specific terms, premium or bonus, because just think about every consumer who buys a chocolate bar with a label on it because of that premium, right? And they're thinking something in their head, I'm paying this extra money and it is going to a farmer, maybe in a one-to-one kind of way. That term has so much confusion. It is implemented by everybody in a different way, at a different scale. And so, Kojo, thank you for that reminder that this key term really is quite confusing, in the context in which it's applied. On that note, I want to ask all of our panelists I'll combine the two questions. I'd ask you to reflect on if there were any terms that were on the draft list of the glossary that I shared and the one that's up on the website now. If there were any terms that you thought particularly were important to define, and if there are any that you think that we really do need to add as a matter of urgency in the early stages of developing the glossary. And so we'll do a quick tour of our panel on this question, and then we will turn to our audience for Q&A.
So should I start first again then? Okay.
Go for it.
I think it's been mentioned before, some of the terms that jumped straight out to me that that we should tackle first would be things like this whole debate about cacao and cocoa, which one we use. And it could be that we will sort of say they are used interchangeably, but this is the definition. And I've seen it in quite a few other industries where they have something very similar, because it's just so ingrained in everyone. So there's no one right or wrong answer. It's so ingrained in everyone. So you can use one or the other. The other word is really I think fine chocolate. And I think that's a key thing. You have FCIA, you've got the two words in there, but exactly what that means, I think a lot of consumers would be quite confused, certainly from the people that I get to see as well. Sometimes they just say, what is fine chocolate? How different is it from something I buy in the supermarket? So I think these are the two terms that I think we can start tackling from that. And maybe I think some of the terms maybe group into certain aspects. So you may want to tackle one category at a time as well. From my kind of like selfish point of view, from the chocolate, the chocolatier side of things, there's a few terms I could see straight away that it may be useful, and I get asked quite a few times before as well. It's like ganache versus water ganache. What are they? Maybe like janduya. What is it? People don't even know how to pronounce it as well in a lot of times as well. And also maybe cremino. What's the difference between cremino and janduya? Because I've seen a few people say submitting products to competition as well. They're using janduya and creminos interchangeably when the products, there are distinctive differences as well. So I think these are some of the terms that could be quite useful, because your consumer can get confused, or I may be thinking of buying one product, and then when I get it, it's like, oh, it's a completely different product altogether. So I think these would be quite useful. And I think Kristy, earlier we talked about the example of chocolate bark versus chocolate slab. What's the difference? Is it, and I talked to someone about it as well, and someone actually explained to me today, oh, maybe chocolate bark is something more irregular shape, while a chocolate slab is something more regularly formed shape, but it's the same thing. I thought, I'm sure that's not the right reason, but these are, even like that, is quite confused for a few people as well. So I think that would be quite useful to see on the list.
I'll jump in, Albert. I love how you talk about defining fine chocolate. I think that's imperative for the Fine Chocolate Industry Association. So I think it's really important to call that out. Also, just defining chocolate. I mean, there's the technical term that I referred to that the FDA, defines, and that's FDI, that's the United States, but there's chocolate in other parts of the world too. So, what is chocolate? Is it just that technical scientific definition, or is it an experience? And I think, I'm excited about these definitions that we're going to collaborate with other people as well. So it's not just one mindset going into defining a term. I'm also really excited that we're doing these definitions in a, gosh, I'm losing the term right now. In like a step-by-step approach, where we're doing so many terms at once. Then 6 months later, we're releasing more terms and more, because I think that this process is going to really excite people about thinking about what terms are important that do need to be addressed. And I think that there are also some other terms that are, maybe harder to address. And so that it's going to take some time to really, delve into the topics and really come up with common understanding that we agree on, that's inclusive. Because the key point of this is connection. That's what this is all about. We make chocolate to connect with people. We create something to share with others, to connect. We have a language to connect with others. And we also want to make sure that we connect. And, I'm a small batch chocolate maker and I make chocolate, but there are also very, very large chocolate makers that on an industrial scale make chocolate, and that is still chocolate and that is still good. And I think that there's space for everyone in this. And I think that it's just important that we just agree to, on the basics, and then we share our perspective and we connect and we take it from there.
Monica, you just always set me right up with because I also, one of the things that jumped out for me was craft chocolate. I'm sure Monica would also agree with that. And I think that's a great example of a term where there's so many layers to that word, and I see so much debate about that word. Is it about size? Is it about how much chocolate you make? If you're too big, do you not get to be craft anymore? If you buy couverture from a bean to bar chocolate maker, but you're a chocolatier, do you get to be called craft, or do you not get to be called craft because you don't physically have beans on the floor of your shop or factory? And I think that conversation is something, again, that I see as a debate, that I see as something that can be divisive. And I would like to see us move away from that and have a shared understanding of how we're going to use these words. And also, and the connection with, craft, specialty, fine, premium, artisan, like all of these words get tossed around. And I think having clarity about what we're all talking about when we use those words is really important. Also for the consumer confusion issue that people have brought up as well.
Yeah, I review the list of the terms in the glossary sorted by category, and I concentrated on the environment. And then I realized there are families of terms, something similar to Albert mentioned, that are groups of terms that are similar in somehow. And in this case, there are a number of terms there, like intercropping, eco-friendly, green production, regenerative agriculture, integrated resource management strategies. They're very similar. They maybe share 80, 70, 90% of the term is overlap with the other terms. So I think in the glossary, we need to kind of look at these families of terms together and try to really express in a way that you can really see what the difference between two similar terms are. This is one thing. And I also agree with Monica that we still have to think harder about the definition of fine chocolate. You know, I look at the website today, and there is a definition there saying fine chocolate is defined in terms of. So you get a number of concepts and elements of the definition, but you never specify anything about those terms. Like it is defined in terms of flavor, it's defined in terms of texture or an appearance, and also in sourcing characteristic. No, but there are so many things inside that is, in the end, you don't have enough criteria to really come up with a definition that separates this is fine and this is not fine. You know, because those terms are in any other kind of chocolate. So we really need to, in the search for a definition, you really need to have the minimum but sufficient number of elements, you know, that can tell the difference between A or B. You know? And I think this is a good start, you know, looking at the definition of fine chocolate, you know, to see really how can using the definition separate what is fine from what is not fine chocolate.
Yes.
You're on mute.
Oh, I was on mute. Kojo, I was inviting you, but I was inviting you to unmute, but I was muted. So please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm here. So I associate with a lot of the other words that have been mentioned already, the craft chocolate and all that, bean to bar. But one thing that stands out for me that I think we should clear is the definition to do with child labor. I mean, also because of where I'm coming from in West Africa, we have this word we bandied about, I mean, a lot. Every day you hear it, child labor. What does it really mean? In terms of our own cultural definition as a people, and then against definitions coming from outside of West Africa, what and the United Nations is saying, what European Union is saying, what does child labor really mean? We need to make that clear. And then also there is sustainable cocoa that I also want to point out. What is sustainable cocoa? You know, is it because it is meeting certain indices by bias, and that's why it is sustainable cocoa, or is it because it is touching, I mean, a very key point in terms.
Kojo, it just went to mute again, and just mid-sentence it muted, so I don't know. Okay, you're back. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Forgive me, the connectivity is not quite good here. Yes, so like I was saying, I think we should look at sustainable cocoa, I mean, specifically sustainable cocoa, and then child labor. We should clear it very well for anybody who uses the resource of this glossary to get a clear definition. At least we should try. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kojo. I mean, and Monica, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Kojo, I am really loving your contributions. This is really adding to the depth of this conversation. I love and I hate the word sustainable. I love it because, you know, I feel like it embodies so many of the things that, you know, we want to practice, but I hate it because it's so ambiguous. There's no clear definition, and it's been like that forever, you know, in so many different industries, you know, sustainable energy, sustainable cocoa, like there's so much, but,
exactly.
you know, and, you know, yeah. So for our business, we define things like for us, like what is sustainable to us, and then we define what that means to us. However, like that's such a flip-flop word for so many people. So I would love to see what FCIA feels is sustainable. And if we can come to agreement for what is sustainable, because it's quite possible that we might not, and I don't know the answer, but that's something that I'd like to try.
Great. Yes.
You know, the other thing, like Kojo, listening to you talk about your examples, the point that I'm reminded of, and I think we all need reminding of this again and again, is that when a term is applied to a specific place, in this case, like child labor being applied generally to West Africa, sustainability, we often hear about it as well, applying to farm level actions and activities. When a term is used in a way where it's associated with a part of the industry, a geographical area, what have you, there are going to be ideas about it that are generated within that geographical area or section of the industry and outside of those places. And my personal hope for the glossary is that it becomes a venue for dialogue amongst those different areas or levels. If we're defining sustainability primarily at cocoa farm level, then I want to hear from people who farm cocoa, what do they think? But I also want to hear from people who don't work at cocoa farm level, how do they define sustainability, and marry their words together in a definition so that we get to see how people are defining these terms in different ways. Same with child labor, right? I would like to know, how does someone who works in cocoa in Ghana define child labor versus how someone outside defines it? Where are the differences? Where are the similarities? We should be looking for overlap. We should be looking for contrast. We should be looking for all these things. And so I'm really grateful for that reminder, Kojo, and I'm hopeful that the glossary gives us a space in which to have these kind of dialogues. So I think what I would love to do, because we did this webinar is 75 minutes, so we have a few minutes left. So what I would love to do is invite all of our expert panelists to stay, if you can, for the next few minutes, and take a few questions from the audience, and then we'll save a couple of minutes at the end for some wrap up and next steps. And Kate Cavallin will join me for that conversation. But we do have a few minutes to take some questions now, and you can feel free, anyone who's tuning into this webinar, to ask any question that you want about process, about specific terms. You can ask of our panelists. You just please feel free to contribute your questions. I see a lot of activity in the chat, and I'm really grateful that so many people have been already engaged. There's quite an extensive conversation going on already about the definition of fine and about the distinction between cocoa and cacao, which is for me really exciting to see some of that happening already in the chat on this very webinar. So, but any questions that you'd love to pose in this moment, we're happy to take, including from our panelists. If you have any questions about the process or the glossary, you should feel free.
I think one of the things that's important to remember is this is also a tool to help consumers make informed purchase decisions. I can't tell you how many times I've stood in the chocolate aisle at Whole Foods or other grocery stores, and there's, other than your label, like, what does the consumer have to go by, and is there a way to communicate what they're buying, in, you know, whether it's based on their values or their dietary preferences or origin or you know, whatever the case may be. And so I think the work that you're doing is critical to growing the industry and also getting people to understand the price difference between a fine chocolate bar versus a quote unquote candy bar. And even in a grocery store like Whole Foods, I will find some chocolate bars in the grocery aisle, and then the fine chocolate bars are near the coffee and the cheese. That's specialty food. So even where the products are placed, and I will see some of our members in grocery and some of our members in specialty. You know, like, I can't even like corral them into one section.
Effie, thank you very much for that. And I just want to call out a few things that I see in the chat. when is the glossary available? So the page, there's already a page up on the FCIA website that has 5 definitions and the draft list of terms, which we'll be adding to now on a basis, the basis of this very conversation that we've just had with our expert panelists. The format, the eventual format, and Effie's just shared the link. Thank you for doing that, Effie, in the chat so that you can go straight to that page by clicking on the link. And I'm certainly hopeful that the searchable database format will be live soon. I don't want to put a date on that, but I'm hopeful that that will happen in the near future. Where do genetics play a role in heirloom or fine designations? I think there's 3 terms in there that are, will definitely be on this list. Genetics should really have its own entry, I think, in the glossary, and heirloom as well as fine. There's already been so much conversation around the designation of fine in this webinar. And I think there's 3 elements of that question that will need to be hashed out in the glossary and in the related activities around the glossary. A section, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Martin, for all, Martin, Kristy, for all your contributions to this conversation. I've been monitoring them as best I can. It needs a section on chocolate making. Yes, absolutely. And I think it gets back to what Eduardo was saying before about categories. So we've built in a function to the glossary that each term falls under one of 5 or 6 categories. And that makes it an easy way to see, if you sort by category, where the focus is, where we have done a lot of work on defining particular terms. Do we have a really healthy section on environment, but we need, more contributions around chocolate making, for example? Do we have good definitions around social and economic justice? So they will be categorized, and that's not clear on the page. Forgive me, I should have added that element and spoke about it before, but it will be available in the final version as a searchable database. And yeah, this question about testing terms with consumers for relevance, I really love that suggestion. I think it's a really great idea to test these things with the entries with people who are not in the professional capacity of working in chocolate. It's a requirement of the definition that it be written in language that's understandable to a layperson, but it needs review, it needs revision. And it's an excellent idea to bring something into the process to ensure that the language is accessible and approachable. Layering, basics for consumers and more depth, absolutely 100%. Again, Martin, and that is another element that I did not mention, but we'll just quickly share now, is that when we invite authors to contribute a definition for a term, the basic definition is the foundation. It will need to be in lay language. It will need to be accessible. And then we are offering the opportunity for a deep dive. That will be a separate paragraph, a separate, not section of the definition, but it will be clear that it is a more technical explanation of the term. And so we are allowing, we are inviting authors to do that, to submit one definition that is the kind of general, approachable, accessible one, and then put in another more technical deep dive to add that layer on. Yeah, so thank you very much, Martin, for reminding me that that is an element of the database and the glossary. So I think that we are just at time. And so I'd love to do 2 things. Thank once again our fantastic panelists. Thank you all. You are calling in from all over the world and I know you're in many different venues right now. Thank you so much for being here, for all of the prep work that you did leading up to this, and for your continued thought leadership around this issue. So I personally have already learned listening to you here today, and I really look forward to that process continuing. So thank you so much to our panelists. And I'd also like to invite Kate to just share with me some words on next steps. What's to follow, Kate?
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. This was such a great conversation. I felt like we had such a wonderful communication with the audience, and this is really invigorating for all of us to recognize we are in the same situation, trying to communicate as best we can with our markets. And that's really a shared goal that the Value Chain Committee and specifically our working group is trying to help tackle. So thank you guys. And in terms of next steps, we'll be sharing the press release, which is the format that Kristy has been working on for members to communicate about the ecosystem assessment. So really, we were jazzed about an ecosystem assessment, so we should all understand where we are. And then we realized we really do need to define some of these terms before we can start communicating about what we do. So we took a step back and we started here, which is great, but we'll come out and communicate because there are some really wonderful things that we can share about our industry and the group of people we're working with and are sharing this space with. So that will come out soon, and then we'll begin revising the assessment and lots of more updates from me to come. But thank you all very much for joining. And Effie, I'll leave it with you.
Thank you. So just to kind of piggyback on that press release, the other group that we really want to educate are the buyers, and the buyers that are at trade shows. So at the beginning of the hour, I rattled off several trade shows. And so the goal is for that press release to go out to those buyers that are attending those shows so that they can also be making informed purchase decisions of the products they have on their shelves. So, and even though they're not the ultimate consumer, they are the ones that are purchasing and making decisions as to what the consumer sees on the shelf. So we're actually going to include a recording of the webinar with this so that they will have the whole context of the conversation.
Can I just add one more process thing? In addition to the many other process things I've said today, I'll just reiterate that we will be sharing after the webinar the links to the forms to submit proposals for terms, authors for terms, revisions to existing terms. That's a live process that can start now. You can fill out that form at any time. The review committee will look at it twice a year, I think is the expectation, but that doesn't stop you from thinking about this at any time that you want to and filling out the form. The other thing I just want to quickly add is that we are really actively looking for an intern to help take this process forward, or volunteers in any capacity who are interested to work on this glossary. It is a lot of work. It's quite a bit of work, and there are a lot of layers to adding a new term to the glossary or revising an existing term. So any and all hands that would like to get on deck for this one will be most welcome and most appreciated. So thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. This has been a very informative webinar, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. This is just the start, and I expect to see a lot of emails and suggestions for new vocabulary coming our way. And thank you all for the work that you did on this. This was a lot of work, and thank you for tuning in from all corners of the globe. All right, have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good time.